Hello, today we are going to take an Access MDB file and export it using C# source code. This is how the database looks like. It's named the library.mdb. It's in Access 2000 format, so not ACCDB format. We have three tables. These are the relationships between tables. There's primary keys auto increment in all of the three tables. And then there are foreign keys from the user to book table towards the user table and towards the book table. And then we have three queries. Let's look at the data. Some books, some users. The user to book table just contains some integers. And then SQL query, select asterisk from books, select asterisk from users, and then two inner joins. Let's see how this thing looks like. So it's select asterisk from user inner join book inner join user to book. Pretty standard tables, relationships, foreign keys, primary keys, and queries. We'll start by exporting the SQL query for each of the queries inside of Access. For that, we are going to use Microsoft Visual Studio 2022 Community. We have installed Microsoft Office 2019 for Access. We want to use Access programmatically. So from inside the C# source code, we're going to actually load Access DLL files and Access COM objects and use those. Let's first create the Visual Studio solution. So Visual Studio 2022, create new project. It's the first time that I start Visual Studio. So we want an empty solution. This thing, blank solution. Next, we'll put it in the directory where we work. The name of the solution, Access Exporter. Okay. Next up, we want to create a C# command line application. So a csproj, console app.net. We're using .NET 8, which is the latest version of .NET, which is the successor of .NET Core, which is the successor of .NET Framework. We're going to use the same name as the solution for the project. I do not want top-level statements. Okay, let's see that the program works correctly. So we're going to run it without debugging, Control F5. Should say hello world, and it does. Let's see if the debugger works. So from the main menu, debug, start debugging F5. We're going to hide the diagnostic tools. And see the shortcuts in the debug main menu. Step over F10. So F10 once, twice, and the program has finished. Okay. I do not want to press any key to continue to close this window anytime I use a debugger. So I'm going to do what it says in here. Tools options. debugging, automatically close is not checked and should be checked. Automatically close the console when the debugging stops. Okay. Let's run again and start the debugger from the toolbar. F10, F10, and the command line window should close automatically. Okay. First of all, we want to export the three queries. We're going to take the SQL statements and from the query list of books and store it into a plain text file. The same for the other two queries. Okay. For that, we're going to create small classes. Access query exporter. Export queries. Control dot. Generate class in this file. Control dot. Generate method. Classes most often are internal. Methods most often are public. I don't need a constructor. Okay. And from this method, we're going to use access automation. So we're going to use COM, Microsoft's inter-process communication with RPC infrastructure. Okay, similar to Microsoft's DCOM, Corba, etc. For that, we want to load inside of this process, which is a managed process, .NET 8.0, written in C#, command line. We want to load Microsoft Access 2019 DLLs. And those DLLs, in order to access MDB files, are probably going to be 32-bit. And I want this process to be both 32-bit and Windows specific, so not cross-platform. Target OS Windows, because I'm going to use COM objects. Okay. Platform target, I want it to be x86, not ARM, not 64-bit. Let's rebuild. Let's see where the generated files are going to be stored. So in the directory of the solution, the directory of the project, bin, the build configuration, which is debug, and then .NET 8 Windows. Probably this directory is not needed anymore. Let's see if just double clicking on this file does what we expect it to do. And it's unhandled exception. I have a not implemented method, this one, which is what we would expect. Okay, so I have populated the method access query exporter export queries with some copy-paste code from the internet. And I do not like that there's a left-right scroll bar in Visual Studio text editors. So I will fix that. I want to wrap. Okay, so the left-right scroll bar in text windows has disappeared. And now when a line is too wide to be shown on a single line, it will be shown on as many lines as needed. And it might have this line continuation character. And I can see from the line number that it doesn't increase. So we're still on line 36 in here. We're not at line 37. This is line 37. Okay. I'm used to having line wrapping enabled on all of my text editors, so I know what's happening there. Okay. So we have one directory where we have the library.mdb file, which is c:\10\work. This directory I have put into a const, and I have the full path to the library in a field of the class const. Okay. Let's now start building and fix the issues. We just copy pasted some code. We didn't put the correct usings and the correct dependencies. Okay. Says application class not found, control dot, and it says something about Microsoft Office Interop Excel, which I will guess that's about the Microsoft Office Interop Access, actually. Okay, so that's dependencies, add com reference, com, and then something with access. Microsoft Access Object Library. Okay, what other possibilities are there? Microsoft Access Data Access Components. Microsoft Office Access DEOL. Let's try one of these. The problems are like this. In order to decide if this com DLL in process library comes from Microsoft Office Outlook, we would need to see at least the full path of the file. So in this case, for Microsoft Access 16 object library, we can see that the full path is c:\program files x86 Microsoft Office 16, and then it says MSACC, so Microsoft Access OLB. So this I can guess that it's related to our problem. And also I can see from the name it says Microsoft Access Object Library, and then it says 16. So 16 being Microsoft Office 2019, the version, the major version. Okay, whereas this one, Microsoft Access Components installed version, doesn't contain 16 in the version, contains access in the name, but it's not the application access from Microsoft Office. It's actually data access. And also the full path is c:\windows/syswo64, and is something with ODBC. So ODBC is a standard of connecting to databases from multiple programming languages using standardized objects and connection strings. Okay, what about this one? So this is from Access, because I can see ACE. So ACE and JET are the technology of storage the MDB file format. I can also see file version 16.0, and it says both Office and Access in the name of the library. So let's try with these and this just in case. Okay. This is RDP Modesto protocol. This is ODBC. This is, I don't know. This is control panel, accessibility, and this is accessibility. So making the operating system and applications usable from screen readers, for instance. Okay, so the only two libraries files that seem to be related with Microsoft Access, I have added them. So it's going to use TLB imp to import the signatures of the objects and interfaces, etc., other symbols exported from the type library. In Visual Studio, they will appear under project dependencies com. We have two type libraries. Let's compile again. Okay, so it says application class not found, control dot, using Microsoft Office interop access correct, and build again, F7 to build. It says application class cannot be embedded. You need to not embed this thing into this executable, into the executable access exporter.dll or exe. That we do by right-clicking on the COM reference properties, and we say embed interop types, no. And the same thing for the other one. Okay, so now if you look at both COM, we'll say embedded interop types, no. Build. Okay, so now we have application class, but we don't have the rest of the things, which is the most important part that we're missing is the type database, which is a COM type, a co-class, a class, an interface, something like that, from Microsoft Office interop access DAO and its dependencies. Okay, let's see if we can fix something. It says add reference to Microsoft Office interop access DAO, which we already have. It's this guy. So what it's actually missing is dependencies of these two DLLs. Let's look at them. Can we generate? Okay, so we have interop ADODB and interop access the DAO one. We don't need a result. And it says that it has built correctly. Yeah, I can see it's missing other COM type libraries as DLLs in here. So let's put a breakpoint and start debugging. We don't need the console write line anymore. Control X twice. F5. And it immediately complains that it could not find the Office DLL. Okay, so it could build correctly, but it cannot run correctly. There's a runtime DLL loading issue. Okay, so let's fix this issue by looking using the C#.NET disassembler ILDSASM. We're going to look at these DLLs and see what other DLLs we're actually missing. I have ILSpy in here. Not LDASM, but ILSpy. Graphical User Interface Application. Okay. Let's remove these things. Let's look at Access Exporter exe. Says that it doesn't contain anything managed. It's just, written in C++, a stub or something like that. That's precompiled and okay. Whereas this one is actually a C# source code converted into a portable executable DLL file. Okay, let's look at its dependencies. References. Only these two DLLs that we know about. Let's look at these two DLLs. So we can either open them by drag and dropping from the file manager towards ILSpy, or we can open them from here, from ILSpy. We expand the Access Exporter DLL. We go to references, and then when we double click on each of these two, they will be opened in ILSpy. So let's look at them. Does this file exist? Yes, it's this one. What about its dependency? So it says it references interop addodb, which we did not import yet. It's not available in this directory. That's a problem. So we want interop addodb. Let's see how we get to that. Com, add com reference, and addo. I happen to know the name of its type library. I'm not sure how you would get to find its name. The correct way to do it is to hover on all of these possibilities, which is, I don't know, 400 of them, until you get to a file that's named addodb.dll.tlb.ocx, etc. So the extension for ActiveX, graphical user interface controls, and COM in process type libraries might be DLL, as in this case, or CPL for control panel plugin. So the extension varies. Could be an exe. Okay, could be an OCX or an ActiveX, as in this case. Or could be a TLB, where the probably the executable objects, the binary is in one file, and then the COM type signatures, the reflection information, the MSI, whatever, the metadata about the types that are exported from the DLL are the metadata is exported from a TLB file, from a different file. Okay, so that's the way to do it. You hover over all of them. And what we're actually after is called something with ActiveX. These guys. Microsoft ActiveX data object. So this is ADO. So says that ADODB is missing, and the file that we're after is MSADO, and then the version could vary and the extension could vary. We see that we have version 6.1, in here 6.0, and here 2.8. Most of these are the exact same binary, the exact same class, the exact same everything, but just the metadata is at different versions. So it doesn't really matter what we're selecting in here. So I'm going to go with the newest in the series 2, so that's 2.8. I need to check the checkbox. Okay. And in here it should say interop ADODB, what we can see here. Okay, so it says it wants interop.adodb. We have it in here. This probably also needs to not be embedded. So embed interop types, no. And build. And should appear in here. Interop ADODB, this guy, .dll. And now we'll do a refresh. If references, export this first one. MS Core lib exists in .NET 8. Interop ADODB does not appear now, but if we come back like this, it's going to appear. So it's in the correct directory where we have the rest of the binary build artifacts from the Access Exporter. Great. So this is done. This guy is in the correct directory. MS Core lib, we certainly do have this one. We saw it previously. So we're done with the COM reference that ends with DAO. It depends on MS Core lib. Okay, and then for the dependencies of this one, the one which does not end in DAO, interop Microsoft Office, interop Access, this guy, we have two more dependencies that we want, Microsoft VB interop and Office. Okay, so this one, Office, seems that will be loaded not from my current directory, but from the .NET GAC, Global Assembly Cache, and was put there when we installed Office 2019. Okay, that's good. What about this one? Microsoft VBE Interop is also version 15, so I'm guessing it's from Office and from the GUC. So at this point, we should be good. We have all of the dependencies met. Rebuild. Okay, and start debugging. Okay, it still complains about Office. Okay, so it seems that it cannot find the office.dll from the global assembly cache. Let's actually import it as a COM reference. Let's see what that reference is. I searched for Office. The only reference with a very short name related to Microsoft Office is this one, mso.dll. Sounds okay. Let's hope that if we import this COM reference, the assembly name will be just Office or interop.office. Interop Microsoft Office Core. Okay. And start. The same thing. So could not load Office. Let's look at its dependencies. Bin debug. Oh, it's not even in here. Properties. Don't embed. Build. It appeared in here, interop Microsoft Office Core. Let's look at its dependencies. Refresh, expand, references, this one without DAO, this thing, finds it in the global assembly cache, and that's it. And doesn't seem to depend on anything. We'll also add this one if it's not enough, if we still cannot run the program. We still cannot run it. Collapse everything, Control A, delete. Let's see what are the dependencies of this one. References, nothing in particular. So I guess this is what we're missing. We want to have Microsoft VB Interop DLL in the directory where we have the rest of the build artifacts, so in this directory. Okay, but then what type library, what COM object do we, DLL do we need to import? So I can see it says VBIDE. It has this GUID for the type library. Version 15, that smells like Microsoft Office. Okay, if we search in here, we could search by IDE. Nothing interesting. We could search by basic. Might be either this or this or this. This has version 5.3. Maybe it's this one. On my Windows machine, I have installed the latest Windows kit. And in here, we have the binaries for x86. We have this application that was bread and butter when you created COM objects, DCOM libraries, ActiveX or Microsoft standard extensions since the year 2000. Looks like this. We're going to ignore anything except type libraries. In here, the type library was Microsoft Visual Basic for application extensibility. Let's go there. Sorted alphabetically by type library name. So Microsoft Visual Basic for application extensibility 5.3. And we can see that the typelib graphical user typelib GUID is the same. So ends with 46 and starts with 2e1c7c4. Maybe this is the one. Microsoft Visual Basic for Applications Extensibility 5.3. Okay, we're importing, we're making it to not be interop embed. Save, build, make sure it appears in here, in the build output directory, this guy. And let's try running again. And it still fails. I'll be back once I find the solution. I just rebuilt the solution and everything started working. There's a warning in here where it says that while importing mso.dll, which contains a com type lib, there's a property getter named type or series gradient stop color format, and the generator has changed the signature from a property getter to a method. Okay, this is the, where is it? MSO, this guy. Okay, start debugging. And the exception was somewhere here. And now we're inside the export queries method. This is automating the Microsoft Access application. The application may appear. You probably cannot automate the same application twice from two different threads, from two different processes. Okay, it managed to open the MDB file. Let's see how many queries there are. There are 3. Takes each of the queries. The first one is the query list of books that has the SQL statement select asterisk and then new line from book semicolon and then new line. creates a file path and then writes to that file path the SQL query statements that we saw previously. Closes the access query. Okay, let's see the second and the third query. And now it's closing the access application. This application. Let's close it from the task manager. MS Access, this process, right click and process 3. And let's see the generated query files. So list of books, the one with the 2 inner joins, and list of users. Great, let me clean up a bit the toolbar in Visual Studio. Okay, next up we'll export the tables. Let's comment out this part. We generated the plain text files. Now we can, there's no need to run the exporter of queries again. First of all, we want to export the structures of the tables. And why are we exporting from Access? In order to write to MS SQL. So we're going to actually generate SQL queries that work on Microsoft SQL Server, MS SQL. So we'll have queries like dropping a table, create a table with certain columns, dropping another table, create another table, etc. So let's open the SQL Server Management Studio and create there a database where we'll be able to generate the same structure of tables that is in Access, and then we'll be able to move the rows from the Access tables to the MS SQL tables. You can select either run the start menu, all apps, and then find in here the SQL Management Studio. It's under Microsoft SQL Server Tools 20, SQL Server Management Studio 20, or you can start writing. So open the start menu and write, for instance, manage. Okay. There's just one MS SQL Server instance installed in here. It's of type MS SQL latest version Express. I can connect either using Windows Authentication or SQL Server Authentication. I know the password of the user as A. Let's use that. There's no databases yet. Let's create a database. Let's use today's date. Okay, we keep the defaults. There's nothing that needs changed. Okay. And let's create a table and see what the SQL query is for recreating the table from scratch. Okay, so what was the structure? We could create a structure very similar to what we have in Access. So we have the table books, column name, that's book ID, not nullable, data type, this is the auto number, int ISBN. This thing is n varchar, and if you can get away, then the best type for representing strings in MS SQL it's n varchar of max. And nulls might not be allowed. There's no book without ISBN, or maybe there is. No. Author the same thing, and varchar of max, and title. Okay, and the name is book. Okay, and now we can script this table or the entire database. Let's add a row. So this thing, I do not have an auto increment number yet. Okay, save. Let's see that we have entered the row correctly. Right click on the table, select top 100. So select is read only, and edit top 200 is read write. Okay, let's script the table. So right click on the table, script table as, drop and create to, new query editor window. Okay, so this is the generated query. Let's see if we can turn line wrap in here. Word wrap. Okay. So it says use this database, not any other. And if the table book exists, it will delete the table book, and then it will create a table book. Because if the table book already exists and you're trying to create it, it's going to generate an error. Whereas if the table does not exist and you try to delete it, might also generate an error. So this is as fail-safe as it goes. If exists table book, then drop it and then create it. Our table right now doesn't have a primary key, and we'll need to create such a thing. So let's try to delete the existing rows. Let's try to add the primary key. Save. And says that it's too late in the game. Okay. Let's delete the table. And create again the table. This time with a primary key. Okay, so I have created the table from scratch. Book ID, int, ISBN, and varchar of max. Author, the same thing. Title, the same thing. And then I have put the primary key on the first column of book ID. Save, and now let's script the table again. Right click, script, drop and create. And now it also has a constrained primary key, this thing. So this is the type of SQL query that we want to create from C#. I've copied this SQL script as a comment in the C# source code, and we'll have a class that exports just one MS SQL table, one Microsoft Access table, and then in a loop we'll go over all of the tables that exist in MS Access and export all of those. Okay, I just copy pasted some code from the internet. Let's make it build. OLEDB connection. That sounds like system data. Okay, let's run this thing in the debugger. From the start. So it says export all tables, which for now exports just the table book. The class 1 table exporter has as member the field table name. In this case, it's a book. We have in here as a C# comment the SQL query that we should generate. We need to create a OLEDB C# ADO.NET connection string to the MDB file. And then there's this method from OLEDB connection that says get the database schema table. And in there we specify that we want just the table book. This is, let's look at the signature of this thing. So this is the restrictions, not to return all of the structure. It's an array of objects. Schema table is not null and is viewable. There's a viewer in the Visual Studio debugger experience. Looks like this. So it's a table that's just related to the structure of the table books in Access. There's one row for each of the columns in the table. So the columns in the table are book ID, ISBN, author, and title. The order in which we receive the columns is alphabetic by column name, which is the wrong order. We want this order, the ordinal position order. So we want book ID first, ISBN second, author third, and title fourth. So we already know the number of columns in the book table, the order, the name, the order of the columns, the name of the columns, and we have the type of the column. So 130, this is that text of 255, which will become nvarchar of max, and 3 is probably int, numeric in Access. There's also the number of characters, so that's an array of characters of 255 maximum length. For numbers, there's precision, exactly the way we have them in here. So this thing is integer, long integer. These are short text of 255, field size. And that's it. So now we're using this table with 4 rows to generate the SQL query for one table. First of all, we sort by the column ordinal position. Now, if you look at the same table, it's sorted by ordinal position, which means book ID, ISBN, author, title, the correct order of columns in the book table. Okay, the first part is this one. If exists, select from sys objects where object ID. All of these things are unchanged for various tables in the Access database. The only thing that varies by Access table name is this thing, DBO book, and then DBO book again, a second time. So we'll create this SQL query and put in here and in here the name of the table. So that we do it in here, there's this table name once and this table name twice. Okay. Then we have create table, this SQL query. In here we know the name of the access table. It's this member of the class. We know all of these 4 columns and their types. And the primary key is just the first column, book ID in this case. And we put book ID in here, the first column, the name of the first column. And pk book, this is just pk underscore and then the name of the table. And this thing is identical for all of the access tables. So we just do a big replace. In here, table name, column name of the first column. And in here, we generate the row where we insert one of such rows, where we put a new column in the MS SQL table. Okay, so create table is this part, this line 55 is this one. We're computing the primary key number, primary key column name is just the first column. Okay, then we're looking at the data type. If the data type is numeric and it's the first, and we don't have any primary key column name, we're going to save the name of the primary key column. And primary keys cannot be null, so we put in here not null. For the rest of the columns, we put null. Okay, so this is a switch, a case by data type. 130, that's string. ADWCHAR. Okay, these types come from OLE database, not from C#. From Access. From ADO, but not from ADO.NET. ADO. Okay, and that's all there is to it. At the end, we create the primary key statement. The result is the SQL query that we're after. This thing. Let's look at the differences between what we have generated. This SQL query. and the expected value, which is from MS SQL Management Studio. PK book, this one. Okay, so it doesn't have this space. We probably want to have it, such that the difference between what MS SQL Management Studio generates and what the C# source code generates is really minimal. I do not know what these things do, so I did not put them in here. This use statement probably will be as part of the connection string, we'll see. And this text image on primary, we don't have it. We'll see if it's really necessary for our example. So this class that we worked on previously for one table exports just the table structure, so the table name and then columns and primary key. We will have different sets of SQL queries for the rows in the tables in the Access database. That will probably be paginated, like we'll take just 100 rows of each table, export that to an SQL query, write it to a plain text file, and then take that plain text file and execute it on MS SQL Server. Okay, so that's why I have renamed the class to one table structure exporter. Let's see how we export the structure of all of the tables. For that, we need to know the names of all of the tables in Access. We don't need this breakpoint anymore. Get table names. We have the ADO.NET connection string to the Access database. We open it. We get the schema for just tables. Okay, let's look at this thing. It's a data table, so it can be previewed in the Visual Studio debugger. So there's not only tables, which we can see are of table type table, but there are also the views, which are of table type view. So we need to look only at the table type table, 1, 2, 3. And the names are book, user, and user to book. They're sorted alphabetically by table name. Okay, so we do this select. And the data row has the value a table. This thing. So inside of a data table, we're on the first row in this case, and in there we get the column table name. So from the current row, the column table name. This goes 3 times, and this is the list. Book, user, user to book. Okay, and now we do a for each of the table names. We generate an SQL query, then we concatenate all of those SQL queries for all of the tables with new lines between them. Shift F11. So the shortcuts are F10 step over, F11 step into, Shift F11 step out. Okay, so the SQL query is quite long. This is the part for the table book, the part for the table user, and the type part for the table user to book. The SQL query is not complete because we don't have the foreign key relationships. We don't have indexes yet. Maybe, I know, the column title is indexed in Access. So you would also need to export the indexes from the Microsoft Access tables. But you also need to be careful because if you put auto increment numbers on the primary keys, then you will not be able to just take the data from the cells that exist in Access and copy them to MS SQL. So probably the strategy is to not have auto increment numbers at all on MS SQL, create all of the MS SQL tables, primary keys, indexes, foreign keys, etc. Copy all of the data, and only after that enable auto increment numbers for MS SQL. Or, I know. And now we're saving all of these SQL query for all of the tables in Access into a single file. Let's look at that file, table structure. It's in here. Okay. The last step that remains is to fetch the rows in Access, the data, and insert it into MS SQL. You would want to do the fastest type of inserts in MS SQL if there's millions of data rows in Access. There's three types of bulk inserts in MS SQL. Use the one that's better suited for you. And hopefully MS SQL sits on an SSD, not on a rotating hard disk. Okay, so let's put a row in the table books and see how the SQL query that we want to generate in C# looks like. And save. Let's select. Okay, the data was written correctly, the first row in the table books. And now let's export all of the data in the MS SQL database, including the rows. How do we do that? Okay, so you cannot script the book, so by table. What you want to do is right click on the database and then you have tasks and generate scripts. And in here you can tell it to not only generate scripts for the database structure, but also for the database data. We want all of the database objects. There's only tables for now in here, so that's okay. Get to a new query window, but we want advanced settings. The setting that we're looking for is under General, Types of data to script. In here says schema only, so only the database structure, but we want schema and data, so database structure and rows and cells in the tables. finish. And now we have the SQL query with rows. There's just one insert statement. So that's the thing that we want. Okay. So that would be new access data exporter. Export data. Let's see for a single table for now. Book. The sample. So we already know how to enumerate the list of tables in Access. This thing. We already know how to enumerate the list of columns in a table in Access, which is this thing. So 1, 2, and then the data type 3. And that gives us this part. So table name, column 1, 2, 3, 4. And also the types. For nvarchar, we want this syntax n single quotes and then the actual value. And then the value, we get it by running on the current table book, the SQL query, a paginated SQL query. So select, I know, top 1000 or top 100 or between 500 and 600. All of the rows between in the 500 and 600 with all of the columns, all of the cells. Once we generate a huge insert statement, we save it to the hard disk, and then we run SQL queries one at a time. We don't know exactly what's the upper limitation on how many inserts we can do at the same time on MS SQL. Maybe there's different MS SQL versions, maybe there's limitations based on random access memory size or something like that. But you will find the correct number. I'm going to guess something between 100 and 1000. You'll see. Maybe there's even limitations in the size of SQL queries in general. Even if your MS SQL query is really, really beef, you cannot insert more than 1000 cells at a time in a single SQL query. So this is it, how you export structure and data, queries and tables from Access, write them to the hard disk, and then push them to an SQL server. Thank you.